The sun hung low over the red cliffs, turning the world into copper and gold. Clara Whitfield trudged through the canyon with a basket of laundry pressed against her hip, her boots sinking into soft, reddish dust. Her breath came hard, the kind that rasped through dry air and echoed in the chest like sandpaper. She had been walking since dawn, searching for clean water to wash the clothes and linen she used to earn a few coins from nearby settlers. Her well had turned to mud after the last flash flood. The storm had swallowed her bucket and filled her only barrel with brown water. Clara, ever stubborn, refused to ask anyone for help. Pride had kept her alive this long, that and the memory of her late husband who'd once promised her a ranch full of green pastures. Now all she had was a half-collapsed cabin, a mule that limped, and a determination that burned as fierce as the desert sun. She paused beside a boulder, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. The canyon stretched ahead in winding turns and silent rock faces. Then, faintly, she heard it. Water. It was a low, rhythmic sound like the breathing of the earth itself, a steady gurgle that promised relief. Clara's heart lifted. She picked up her skirts and hurried toward the sound, following the narrow path between the rocks. The air grew warmer as she went, strangely humid, carrying the scent of pine and earth. When she rounded the bend, the sight made her gasp. A pool of crystal water steamed gently beneath an overhang of stone, framed by smooth black rocks and thick green ferns. Sunlight filtered through the narrow canyon walls and danced across the surface like liquid gold. Clara had never seen anything so beautiful. A hot spring, she whispered to herself. She didn't know that this place had a name among the Apache. Spirit Bath, a sacred spot where warriors came to cleanse wounds and speak to the spirits of their ancestors. She only saw a gift from heaven. Clara knelt by the edge, testing the water with her fingers. It was warm, deliciously warm. Just a few minutes, she murmured. Only to rinse the dirt. She set the basket down and began to scrub a piece of linen against a rock. The steam softened the air, easing her dry lungs. For the first time in weeks, she felt calm. Then came the sound. A low splash behind her. Clara froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Out of the mist, a figure rose from the water. He was half submerged, his dark hair slicked back, his skin glistening in the light. The water lapped against his chest, a broad, strong chest marked with faint scars and inked symbols she didn't understand. His face was sharp and still, eyes black as the canyon shadow. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He didn't speak. He only stared, the kind of stare that seemed to strip away all lies. "Oh, dear heavens," she stammered, stepping backward. Her foot slipped on the wet rock, and before she could catch herself, she tumbled with a splash straight into the pool. The shock of the heat stole her breath. She flailed, sputtering, trying to find her footing. Her skirts tangled around her legs. Then a firm hand caught her under the arm. Another steadied her waist. The strength in that grip was undeniable. When she looked up, she was staring right into his face. Inches away now. Water dripped from her lashes. His eyes didn't move. They studied her, unreadable and deep, like he was trying to decide whether she was real. His voice, when it came, was low and quiet. "You should not be here. I didn't know." She stammered, trying to step back. Her heart thudded against her ribs. He released her slowly, his touch lingering just long enough to send a tremor through her chest. Clara stumbled toward the rocks, clutching her soaked skirt. He reached to the side and pulled a buffalo hide blanket from a nearby stone, holding it out to her. She hesitated, but something in his gaze, steady, unthreatening, almost protective, made her take it. Wrapped in the heavy warmth, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "No one comes here by accident." His words hung between them, carried by the rising steam. And though Clara didn't yet understand, something deep inside her stirred. A quiet knowing that the man before her wasn't just a stranger she'd stumbled upon. It felt, impossibly, like destiny had reached out from the water itself and caught her. Steam curled around them like smoke, blurring the world into gold and gray. Clara stood at the edge of the spring, soaked to the bone and clutching the heavy hide blanket around her shoulders. Every breath she took trembled. Her heart had not yet slowed since the fall, nor since the moment she'd met those dark, unflinching eyes. The Apache stood a few steps away, his body still half in the water, the steam wrapping him like mist from another realm. He said nothing. He only watched, not cruelly, not even coldly, but with a kind of grave curiosity, as if he were looking through her, not at her. For several heartbeats, the canyon was silent except for the faint drip of water from the rocks. Clara didn't know whether to speak or to run. Every lesson drilled into her by the settlers told her to fear this man, but fear didn't quite fit what she felt now. Awe, perhaps, or confusion. She cleared her throat. I thought this spring was open land, she managed, her voice small. I didn't mean to trespass. Still, he said nothing. His silence felt deliberate, powerful, a language of its own. When he finally moved, it was with a calm, measured grace. He stepped out of the water, towering above her, his form lean and strong, the kind of strength born from wilderness, not vanity. Clara turned away quickly, cheeks burning as she focused on her basket floating in the pool. Lord have mercy, she whispered under her breath, more prayer than words. She crouched to fish the clothes out, her hands shaking. Before she could reach one, a shadow fell over her. The warrior stooped silently, retrieved the basket with one hand and set it beside her. The gesture startled her more than his voice might have. He didn't speak, just met her eyes for an instant before stepping back. She swallowed hard, unsure whether to thank him or stay quiet. His gaze wasn't cruel, yet it held a depth that made her chest tighten. Finally, she blurted, I'll just go. I'll leave you to your bath. When she took a step, her ankle twisted sharply. A small cry escaped her lips, and before she could fall, his arm caught her again, firm and steady as stone. Her fingers brushed his bare skin by accident. It was warm, solid, and alive in a way that made her pulse skip. For a moment, neither moved. His breath brushed against her hair. Then he eased her upright, his hand remaining at her waist for a heartbeat longer than necessary. His voice came low, like thunder softened by distance. You walk far from your people, he said. It was the first time she heard him speak. His English was rough but clear, carrying a tone that made her shiver, not from fear, but from how deeply it resonated. I didn't mean to, she said quietly. The flood ruined my well. I was only looking for clean water. He regarded her for a long moment, then nodded once. Water is life, he murmured. But this water is sacred. Her eyes widened. I truly didn't know. I believe you. He looked past her toward the canyon mouth where clouds gathered in the distance. You should not travel alone here. There are men less kind than me, less kind. The words hung strangely between them. Clara wasn't sure if he meant danger or something else. She lowered her eyes. You're kind enough, I think, she said softly. A faint curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. The expression caught her off guard, and she looked up again. In the silence that followed, the canyon wind rustled the ferns and a hawk cried somewhere above them. I'm called Clara, she offered, though she didn't know why. Clara Whitfield. The Apache studied her face for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was worth naming. Finally he said, Taji. Taji, she repeated, tasting the sound carefully. It felt ancient and sure, like the land itself. He gave a single nod, then turned toward a narrow trail leading away from the spring. Storm comes soon, he said over his shoulder. You cannot make it back before dark. I'll manage, she replied quickly, though her ankle still throbbed. He stopped, looked at her again. You will not, he said simply. And without another word, he lifted her basket and started up the path, expecting her to follow. Clara hesitated, torn between fear, pride, and something she couldn't yet name. Then she gathered the blanket tighter around herself and limped after him. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with questions neither dared ask, and though she didn't know it yet, that walk through the storm's shadow was the first step into a fate neither of them had chosen. But both would soon claim. The sky above the canyon had turned bruised with storm clouds. The faint roll of thunder echoed between the rocks, and a sharp wind kicked dust around their feet as Clara limped behind the silent Apache. Taji moved with quiet certainty, as though he knew every stone, every shadow of the desert. His pace was steady, his broad shoulders unhurried even as lightning flickered across the rim of the cliffs. He carried her laundry basket easily in one hand, the way another man might carry a loaf of bread. Clara followed, one hand clutching the buffalo hide blanket around her shoulders, the other bracing against the canyon wall. Her ankle throbbed, but she dared not complain. Every step echoed her heart, fast, uneven, uncertain. They didn't speak for several minutes. The silence between them stretched taut as a wire, filled only by wind and the soft crunch of their boots on gravel. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in her throat. When he finally turned his head slightly, his voice came deep and smooth, cutting through the storm's growing rumble. "You walk with pain." Clara hesitated. "It's just a twist." "I've had worse." He gave her a glance, brief, assessing, and said nothing. But she caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or curiosity. Whatever it was, it softened the edges of his expression. She lifted her chin, forcing a small, nervous smile. "I promise I'm not always this clumsy," she said, hoping to lighten the air between them. This time he almost smiled. Just the faintest movement at the corner of his lips. "Water makes the ground treacherous," he said. "And fate makes fools of all." "Fate?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You think fate threw me into your bath?" That earned her a real smile, quick and startling. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps you were not watching your steps." Clara blinked at him, momentarily disarmed by the teasing tone. "I was watching the water," she said defensively. "It's not every day you see a spring so beautiful." He glanced back at her then, just long enough for their eyes to meet. His gaze held hers steady, calm but intense, like a flame that didn't need to burn to be felt. "The water is not the only thing here that is beautiful," he murmured. Her heart tripped over itself. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. His eyes lingered only a heartbeat longer before he looked away again, resuming his path as if he hadn't said anything at all. The wind rose, carrying the scent of pine and approaching rain. Clara's cheeks warmed. She followed quietly, her thoughts spinning. She'd been alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have a man's attention. Not the rough, careless kind she'd seen among settlers, but something different. Taji's presence didn't demand. It noticed. When the first drops of rain began to fall, Taji stopped and looked up at the sky. "We must move faster," he said. "The canyon floods." "I can't move much faster," she admitted, trying to keep pace. He studied her ankle, then crouched suddenly in front of her. "Then you do not walk." Before she could protest, he reached for her, one arm around her back, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her as though she weighed nothing. Clara gasped, her hands instinctively clutching at his shoulders. "Wait, you don't have to." "I choose to," he interrupted simply. His voice left no room for argument. He carried her with effortless strength, his chest firm beneath her trembling hands. Rain began to patter harder, turning dust to dark streaks along his skin. Clara looked up at him, at the sharp line of his jaw, the calm concentration in his face, the way his eyes softened each time they met hers. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt safe in another's arms. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He looked down briefly, his expression unreadable. "Because something brought you here. Maybe storm, maybe chance, maybe fate." His gaze held hers again, deep, certain, but it is not a thing I ignore. Their eyes lingered. The air between them charged, neither speaking, neither looking away. Then another crack of thunder split the sky and he turned, striding up the trail again. Clara's pulse thudded against his shoulder, her breath caught between disbelief and wonder. The rain blurred the canyon into streaks of gray, but she saw only him, the man who'd caught her once from falling into water, and now carried her through a storm. She didn't know where he was taking her, only that she no longer wanted to go the other way. By the time they reached the ridge, the sky had opened wide and furious. Rain poured down in silver sheets, hammering the earth until streams formed beneath the rocks. The smell of wet cedar and smoke filled the air. Taji moved quickly but carefully, his grip on Clara never faltering. She felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm, the rise and fall of his chest in time with the thunder. Every flash of lightning lit his face. Calm, focused, unafraid, while she, half wrapped in his buffalo hide blanket, shivered from more than just the cold. He stopped at the mouth of a rocky overhang hidden by twisted pine trees. From a distance it looked like nothing, just a shadow in the cliffside. But inside was a small, dry shelter built with logs and earth. A low fire already smoldered near the back, its faint orange glow flickering against the stone walls. He bent slightly to set her down, his arms lowering her gently as though she were something fragile. Clara's boots touched solid ground again, but she didn't step away immediately. The moment he released her, the air between them felt colder, emptier. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. "You live here?" He nodded once, crouching by the fire. "When I travel the mountains, yes. My people know this place." The words were quiet, respectful, as though he spoke to the land itself. Clara knelt awkwardly by the fire, stretching her hands toward the warmth. "I'd say I'm sorry for the trouble I've caused," she said softly. "But I suppose you've already done me a kindness I can't repay." Taji reached for a pot hanging above the coals, his movements smooth, deliberate. He poured water into a wooden cup and added a pinch of green needles and herbs. The scent was sharp and clean. "Drink," he said, handing it to her. "It warms the blood." Clara hesitated but accepted. The drink was strange, bitter at first, then soothing, almost sweet. "What is it?" "Pine and sage," he replied. "Good for the storm that lives in the chest." She blinked. "You mean a cold?" His dark eyes met hers through the wavering firelight. "And for sadness," he said. "It heals what you cannot see." The words struck her in a way she hadn't expected. Sadness, he saw it, or felt it, even though she'd said nothing about the grief that had clung to her since her husband's death. She tried to smile, hiding behind the rim of the cup. "Then I'll need a whole pot." He almost smiled again. Almost. The firelight caught the faint curve of his lips, and Clara felt her chest tighten. The rain grew heavier outside, drumming a rhythm against the rocks. Inside, time slowed. Taji sat across from her, mending a leather strap with his knife, his focus steady. The silence wasn't uncomfortable now. It was alive, full of the sounds of fire, wind, and their shared breath. After a while, Clara found herself studying him, the lines of his hands, the old scar that traced from his shoulder down his arm, the way his eyes reflected the fire. "You're alone here," she said quietly. "Like me." He looked up, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "Alone?" She nodded, staring into the flames. "My husband died last winter. Fever. I buried him behind the cabin. Haven't had much company since." He was silent for a moment, then said, "The land does not speak back, but it listens." Clara glanced at him, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "You speak to the land?" she asked. "Always," he said. "When the wind changes, it tells me what comes. When the birds are quiet, I know danger is near. And sometimes," he hesitated, his gaze dropping to the fire, "sometimes it sends someone unexpected." Her breath caught. "You mean me?" He didn't answer directly, only looked up, his eyes dark and steady. "The spring has seen many wounds washed away," he said. "Maybe it meant for you to find it." The storm outside cracked with another thunderclap. Clara's hand trembled, and without thinking, she reached toward the fire, toward him. He caught her fingers before they could touch the flame. His grip was warm, gentle but firm. "You'll burn," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "Maybe I already am." For a long, fragile moment, they didn't move. The rain, the thunder, the fire, they all seemed to fade. There was only the space between their hands, the pulse of something unspoken passing between them. Then Taji released her fingers slowly, his eyes softening. "Rest now," he said, his voice low. "The storm will pass. You're safe." Clara watched him as he turned back to the fire, her heart still beating fast. "Safe," he'd said. Yet something inside her whispered that what she truly felt wasn't safety. It was awakening. Night had fallen thick and heavy over the canyon. The rain outside softened to a mist, but the wind still sighed through the pines, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and wild sage. Inside the shelter, the fire burned low, a quiet, steady flame that filled the space with amber light. Clara sat close to it, wrapped in the buffalo hide blanket, her damp hair hanging loose over her shoulders. The warmth had brought color back to her cheeks, but her heart still raced whenever she looked across the flames at the man sitting opposite her. Taji worked silently, sharpening a blade against a smooth stone. Each movement was slow and deliberate, the sound rhythmic, almost meditative. He seemed utterly at peace, and that stillness drew her in. It made her want to speak, to fill the quiet with something human. She cleared her throat softly. "Do you always live like this?" He glanced up. "Like what?" "Alone," she said, "with only fire and stone for company." He paused, then wiped the blade clean. Alone is not the same as lonely. Clara tilted her head. You don't miss people? Taji's gaze lifted, his eyes catching the firelight. I miss silence more when people are near, he said, then added after a moment. But sometimes silence is too loud. She smiled faintly. That's a lonely thing to say. He looked back to the flames, and for a while neither spoke. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, distant thunder rolling over the mountains. Clara felt a strange calm settle inside her, the kind that comes after a storm both outside and within. She took a deep breath, then said softly, I wasn't always alone either. His eyes shifted toward her, attentive but not pressing. My husband, she continued, her voice trembling. His name was Jacob. He was a good man, quiet like you. He worked hard, built our cabin with his hands. When the fever came last winter, I thought he'd survive. He always did. She swallowed hard. But that night, I woke up and he was cold beside me. The fire popped softly, sending up a spark. Taji didn't interrupt. His silence wasn't empty. It was respectful, grounding, the kind that made her words easier to speak. I buried him out back, Clara whispered. Under the cottonwood tree. The ground was frozen. I had to break it with an axe. She paused, eyes glistening. I never thought I'd survive that winter either. But I did. Somehow I did. Taji set the knife down, his hands resting loosely on his knees. You are strong, he said simply. She laughed softly, though it came out hollow. Strong, I feel anything but. I can barely keep the animals alive and the house leaks every time it rains. He shook his head. You fight alone. That is strength. Something in his tone, steady, certain, made her throat tighten. What about you? She asked after a long pause. Have you always been alone? Taji's jaw tensed slightly. He didn't look at her right away. My people are far to the south now. Many gone, some taken. The land grows smaller every season. His eyes flickered with pain. Not the sharp kind, but deep and old. I stayed. To remember. I'm sorry, she whispered. He met her gaze. Do not be. Remembering is not sorrow. It is a way of keeping them alive. They sat in silence again, their faces lit by the same fire, their griefs mingling quietly between them like smoke. After a while, Clara's hand slipped from beneath the blanket and reached toward the small scar that ran across his forearm. You were hurt once, she said softly. He glanced down at the mark. Long ago, a settler's bullet. Her fingers brushed the edge of the scar before she could stop herself. Does it still hurt? Taji's voice dropped low. Only when I forget why it did not kill me. Their eyes met, steady, searching, neither turning away. For a long heartbeat, the air between them felt fragile, sacred. The firelight painted gold on his cheekbone, caught in the curve of his mouth. And Clara felt something deep inside her stir, something she'd buried with Jacob under the frozen earth. Taji's hand came up slowly, hovering near hers but not quite touching. You carry a wound too, he said quietly. But you hide it, she exhaled shakily. If I stop hiding it, I'll drown. His eyes softened. Then perhaps it is time you let it breathe. The fire crackled softly between them. Rain whispered against the rocks outside. And in that dim light, surrounded by storm and silence, two people who had lived too long in loneliness simply saw one another, not as intruder and warrior, not as widow and stranger, but as souls surviving the same wilderness. Morning crept into the canyon softly, spilling pale light through the shelter's opening. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed and still. Outside, drops clung to the pine needles like glass beads, and the air smelled of wet soil and sage. Clara stirred beneath the heavy hide blanket, the warmth of the dying fire still ghosting her skin. For a fleeting second, she forgot where she was, until she opened her eyes and saw him. Taji sat near the entrance, bare to the waist, sharpening an arrowhead with patient hands. The rising light caught the planes of his back, muscle and sinew marked by old scars that looked more like stories than wounds. She propped herself on one elbow, studying him quietly. There was something in his stillness that calmed her, and yet something in his strength that unsettled her, made her aware of how small and fragile she felt beside him. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked softly. He didn't turn at once. The land wakes early, he said. It tells me when to rise. She smiled faintly. And what does it tell you now? That you should not walk far, he said without looking back. Your ankle needs more time. Clara shifted, flexing her foot. A dull ache reminded her he was right. You're not planning to carry me again, are you? Finally, he looked over his shoulder and the faintest smile curved his mouth. Only if you fall? Something about that answer, simple, teasing, kind, made her laugh softly. Then I'll try not to. He turned back to his work, but she saw him watching her reflection faintly in the small metal edge of his blade. After a moment, she said, That scar on your shoulder, you said it was from a settler's bullet. He nodded, silent. She hesitated, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a small tin of salve, something she'd made from lard and crushed herbs. May I? She asked, his gaze lifted, unreadable. Why? Because it still looks red, she said, meeting his eyes. And because I need to do something useful. You saved me, remember? He watched her a long moment before setting the arrowhead aside and turning slightly, so his shoulder faced her. The motion exposed the scar, a long pale mark crossing his tanned skin, surrounded by faint healed burns. Clara swallowed. The wound looked old, yes, but it was deep, carved into him like a reminder of pain he refused to forget. She dipped her fingers into the salve and touched the edge of the scar carefully. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, alive, strong, steady. The salve glistened faintly in the morning light. Taji didn't move. His breath deepened, his shoulders tensed once, then relaxed. You carry a healer's touch, he said quietly. I was a nurse once, she replied, focusing on her work, back in Kansas before the move west. I used to help the midwife in births, fevers, burns. I thought I'd left all that behind when I married Jacob. You did not leave it, he said. It stayed in your hands. She smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the scar. And you, Taji, you didn't leave your battles behind either. He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze over his shoulder. Some battles live inside, he said. Even when the war is gone, their eyes held. Her hand stilled, resting lightly against his shoulder. The air between them shifted, thickened. She could feel the pulse beneath her fingertips, slow and powerful. He didn't look away. When you touched the water, he said, I thought you were a spirit. Something the spring sent to test me. Clara's lips parted. And what do you think now? He turned fully toward her then, his face inches from hers. The firelight from behind painted gold across his cheek. I think the spring showed mercy, he murmured. She felt her breath catch. Her hand was still on his skin. His heartbeat thudded against her palm. For a moment, neither spoke, only looked, suspended in the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Then he drew in a slow breath and stood, stepping back. You should eat, he said softly, as if the air itself had to be broken gently. Clara nodded, her voice gone. All right. He turned away to prepare food, strips of dried meat, roots boiled in the pot, but the space between them felt changed. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged, living, full of something that neither dared name. Clara touched her fingers to her chest, as if to still the tremor inside. Their wounds were different, yes, one carved into flesh, the other into heart. But as she watched him move through the morning light, she understood something she hadn't before. Some wounds, when met by another's hands, didn't ache, they began to heal. By the time the sun stood high, the canyon shimmered with heat and birdsong. Clara had managed to hobble outside, leaning on a makeshift cane Taji had carved for her from cedar. Each step still hurt, but the ache no longer ruled her. It reminded her she was alive. Taji walked ahead of her, a silent shadow guiding her path. He carried a bundle of herbs in one hand, gathered from the valley floor, and his bow slung across his back. The sunlight caught the beads braided into his hair, flashes of red and white like embers and bone. They stopped beside a shallow stream that glittered in the afternoon light. Clara knelt and dipped her fingers into the cool water, feeling its soft rush over her skin. It's beautiful here, she murmured, almost like the land doesn't remember the fighting. The land remembers everything, Taji said quietly, but it forgives faster than men. She looked up at him, her heart tightening at the quiet sorrow in his tone. He had seen too much. She could tell by the way his eyes softened when he looked at beauty, as if afraid it might vanish. You said the spring showed mercy, she said. Do you really believe that? That I fell there for a reason? He crouched beside her, dipping his hand into the water. Among my people, we say nothing happens without the whisper of the spirits. You could have walked anywhere, but you fell where I was bathing, the one place you were not meant to go. And yet you did. Clara laughed softly, a little embarrassed. And here I thought I'd just slipped on a rock. Perhaps you did, he said with a faint smile. But sometimes fate hides behind foolish things. She tilted her head. And what would fate want with the two of us? Taji didn't answer right away. He stood looking out over the stream, his silhouette sharp against the blazing light. You are alone in a land that does not love strangers, he said at last. And I forgot how to speak to the world without anger. Maybe that is why. Clara rose, steadying herself on the cane. You don't seem angry now. He turned toward her and the sun caught his eyes, dark, deep, almost golden in the light. Because when I look at you, the noise inside me grows quiet. The words hung between them, fragile as a heartbeat. Clara's breath caught. She didn't know what to say, only that she felt the same strange stillness whenever he was near, a peace she hadn't known since before Jacob died. Taji, she began, her voice barely a whisper. When my husband passed, I thought love died with him. I never expected to feel anything again. Not fear, not hope, and certainly not this. He stepped closer, the air between them thick with heat and unspoken meaning. Love does not die, he said softly. It changes shape, like the river when it bends. Her eyes stung, not from sadness, but from the truth in his voice. She looked down at the stream, at the way it curved around the stones, never stopping, always moving. He reached for her hand then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His touch was gentle, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. Warm, grounding, real. You have a strong heart, he said, but you carry too much pain in it. Let it go, Clara, she swallowed hard. And what if I can't? He leaned closer until his breath was a whisper against her ear. Then let me carry some of it. For a long moment she didn't move. The sound of the stream, the distant cry of a hawk, even the wind, and all faded away. There was only his presence, steady and sure, like the earth beneath her feet. When she finally looked up, their faces were inches apart. His gaze didn't demand. It invited. And in that gaze she saw not a warrior, but a man who'd lost and lived. A man who'd been broken and rebuilt by the same world that had scarred her. Her fingers trembled as she reached up, brushing the side of his face. Maybe, she whispered, fate's kinder than I thought. He caught her hand gently and pressed it against his chest over his heartbeat. Fate is what we make with our hands, he said, and our hearts. Then slowly he released her hand. The moment stretched thin between them, unspoken but undeniable. As the sun began to sink, painting the canyon in amber light, they stood side by side, not lovers yet, but something deeper forming and an understanding that whatever brought them together wasn't an accident. It was fate, choosing two wounded souls who needed to remember what it meant to feel again. The peace that had settled between them lasted only a day before. The past came clawing back. By dawn, Taji had gone hunting, leaving Clara with a small fire, some dried roots, and instructions to stay near the shelter. She tried to obey, but the canyon's silence made her restless. The wind whispered through the pines, and every rustle made her glance up, expecting his shadow to appear. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, its heat pressing down like a weight. Clara shaded her eyes, scanning the ridge for any sign of him. But what she saw instead made her stomach twist. A thin curl of smoke rose from the valley below. Not campfire smoke. This was heavier, blacker, controlled, human. Fear crawled cold down her spine. She knew that kind of fire. Settlers, or worse, soldiers. She grabbed her cane and limped to the edge of the ridge. Below, through the shimmering heat, she could just make out 3 figures moving among the trees, rifles slung across their backs, hats low over their faces. White men. She couldn't hear them, but she didn't need to. She recognized the way they moved, the arrogance of men who thought the land owed them something. Her heart pounded. If they found Tazi's shelter, if they saw her here, they'd think the worst. And they wouldn't hesitate to shoot first and ask questions later. Clara turned and stumbled back toward the cave. Every sound seemed louder now, every bird call a warning. She threw dirt over the fire to kill the smoke, then crouched in the shadows, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. Minutes dragged into hours. Sweat trickled down her back. She kept glancing toward the canyon mouth, praying to see Taji's tall shape, praying not to see anyone else. Then, voices. Distant but coming closer. Tracks go this way. Bet the Redskins hiding her. Woman's worth more alive. Clara's blood went cold. She pressed herself against the stone wall, heart hammering so hard she thought it might give her away. She wished she had Taji's knife, but he'd taken it with him. All she had was her cane and the stubborn will that had carried her through a dozen lonely nights since her husband's death. The crunch of boots drew nearer. She could hear the men's laughter now, harsh, careless, cruel. Then, just as one shadow fell across the cave mouth, a sudden, sharp sound split the air, the hiss of an arrow, a cry, another arrow, then silence. Clara barely dared to breathe. A moment later, Taji stepped from between the pines, bow in hand, his face hard as stone. The sunlight gleamed on his skin and his eyes, those deep, calm eyes, and were full of fire. He knelt beside one of the fallen men, checked for breath, and then looked toward her. Are you hurt? Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. No, but they were close. They were going to... He held up a hand gently, silencing her. They will not come again, she swallowed, trembling. You could have been killed. He turned toward the bodies, his jaw tight. I have been close before. Something in his tone chilled her. He wasn't proud, but he was weary. Weary of blood, weary of the endless cycle of fear and vengeance. She stepped toward him, laying a hand on his arm. You didn't have a choice, she said softly. There is always a choice, he murmured, eyes on the horizon. But fate keeps bringing me to the same one. The wind shifted, carrying away the smell of smoke and iron. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw not just a warrior, but a man haunted by what the world had forced him to become. You said fate brought me here, she whispered. Maybe it's not just for me to heal. Maybe it's for you too. He turned then, and the hardness in his expression melted just enough for her to see the man beneath the scars. Maybe, he said, but healing takes more than touch. It takes trust. Clara met his gaze steadily. Then let's start there. The two of them stood in the canyon's fading light, surrounded by silence that had once been filled with danger. Somewhere above, a hawk circled, its cry echoing across the cliffs, sharp, free, untamed. As Taji turned toward the shelter, Clara followed, knowing the shadow of violence would never truly disappear. But she also knew something had shifted inside him, and her. The past had found them both. And somehow they had faced it together. Night came softly, draping the canyon in a hush so complete that even the fire seemed to burn quieter. Clara sat by the flames, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, staring at the sparks rising into the dark. Each ember felt like a heartbeat of the day that had passed, violent, bright, gone too soon. Taji sat across from her, silent as ever, carving the last of the arrows he'd broken in the fight. The flickering light danced across his face, half shadow, half glow, and Clara couldn't help watching the way his expression changed with each turn of the flame. He was strong, yes, but there was a softness in the way his eyes lingered on her now, as though seeing her steadied him. Neither had spoken much since the attack. The tension had faded, but something deeper had taken its place. The quiet awareness of how close they'd both come to losing the fragile bond forming between them. Finally, Clara broke the silence. You didn't have to protect me, you know. Taji looked up slowly. Yes, I did. She frowned, her fingers tightening around her shawl. You risked your life. For me, a stranger who fell into your bath for heaven's sake. He set the arrow aside and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. You were not a stranger when I found you, he said. You were someone fate placed in my path. I do not question the spirits when they give me a reason. Clara let out a shaky laugh, though her eyes stung. You speak of fate like it's a person. It is, he said quietly. It lives in the wind, in the rivers, in every breath between two souls who are meant to meet. For a long moment she couldn't look away from him. His words settled deep in her chest, stirring something she hadn't felt since before her husband's death. A sense of being seen, not as a widow, not as a burden, but as something whole. She drew in a slow breath. When Jacob died, I told myself I'd never love again, she whispered. Not because I didn't believe in love, but because I didn't think I could survive losing it twice. Taji's gaze softened. You loved him deeply, she nodded. He was kind. He believed the world could be better. But the world didn't agree. Her voice broke, but she steadied it. When the fever took him, it took more than my husband. It took the part of me that wanted to live. Taji's eyes lingered on her face, and not pitying, but knowing. Grief is a long winter, he said, but even winter gives way to spring. She looked up, meeting his gaze. The firelight caught his features, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet warmth in his eyes. And what about you? She asked softly. What did you lose, Taji? He hesitated, the knife in his hand stilled. Then with a long breath, he said, a family, a brother, a village that once stood where the soldiers built their fort. Clara's breath caught. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Do not be. The land remembers them. And I carry their spirits when I fight, when I breathe. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind that bound them. Pain, recognizing pain. Clara shifted closer to the fire, her hand brushing against his. She didn't pull away this time. I used to think I came west to escape, she said. But maybe I came here to find something. Or someone, he said quietly. She met his gaze, her voice trembling. Maybe both. For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the canyon, soft as breath. Then Taji reached out, his hand cupping hers. His touch was firm, warm, grounding, not a promise, but a truth. You were not meant to fall, he said. You were meant to be found. Clara's throat tightened, her heart pounding so loud she thought he must hear it. And what happens now? She whispered. He looked up toward the sky, where the stars stretched endless and ancient. Now, he said, we let fate decide if this night is the end of your journey, or the beginning of ours. She followed his gaze, the stars blurring as tears welled in her eyes. There, beneath the vast western sky, surrounded by the wild silence of the world, she realized that love wasn't always born in laughter or comfort. Sometimes it rose from loss, like fire from ash. And as Taji's fingers brushed hers again, gently, wordlessly, she knew what the spirits had whispered all along. She hadn't fallen by mistake. She had fallen into fate. The first light of dawn spilled across the canyon like liquid gold. Mist curled between the pines, wrapping the world in a hushed, sacred calm. The fire had gone cold in the night, but its smoke still whispered faintly, a reminder of warmth, of words, of everything shared beneath the stars. Clara woke to find Taji already awake, sitting by the edge of the cliff where the valley opened wide. His back was straight, his bow beside him, but his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. He looked not like a warrior, but like a man finally at peace with the silence. She rose carefully, her ankle still tender but stronger now. When she stepped beside him, he turned slightly, offering a quiet smile. You sleep lightly, she said. I listen to the sun, he replied. It speaks before it rises. She smiled faintly, then looked out over the land. The world stretched. Before them, endless ridges, winding rivers, cottonwoods turning gold with autumn. Somewhere far below, she could see smoke from distant settler camps curling upward. Will they come back? She asked. Taji followed her gaze. Men always return where they believe there is power or gold. But this land has neither. It only has truth, and truth is something most men run from. She studied him quietly. And what about you, Taji? What are you running from? He turned his eyes to her, calm and steady. Not running, he said softly. Waiting. For what? He paused. For something that feels like home. The words lingered between them, gentle but heavy with meaning. Clara swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She'd spent so long drifting from place to place since Jacob's death, chasing safety, not belonging. But here, in this wild canyon with a man who saw her as more than grief and guilt, she felt something she hadn't in years. She felt rooted. "I thought home was where you came from," she said. He shook his head slowly. "No. Home is where the earth stops fighting you." Clara smiled at that, a small, trembling smile, and whispered, "Then I think I've found mine." For a moment he said nothing. Then quietly he reached into the small pouch that hung from his belt and pulled out a thin braid of leather, woven with a single turquoise bead. He held it out to her. "This is not a promise," he said. "Not a claim. It is a path. One we walk together if you choose." Clara looked at the braid, her vision blurring. The turquoise glowed softly in the dawn light, simple yet beautiful, like everything about him. She took it with shaking hands, feeling the weight of it settle against her palm. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice unsteady, "but I do know I want to walk it beside you." Taji's expression didn't change, but his eyes, those deep, gentle eyes, shone with something she'd never seen before. Not passion, not even relief, but gratitude. He nodded once. "Then we begin today." The sun crested the ridge, spilling light over them both. The warmth touched her face, her hands, the small braid now tied around her wrist. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel the weight of yesterday pressing down. She felt the pull of tomorrow, light, alive, full of promise. They gathered their few things, a bow, a satchel, a shawl, and began the slow descent from the canyon. The world around them glimmered in the new light, alive with color and song. As they reached the edge of the trees, Clara glanced back one last time at the spring, the place where she had fallen by accident, where everything had begun. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting the sky. She smiled, whispering to herself, "No accident at all." Taji turned, catching her gaze. "What did you say?" She shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Just thanking fate for being clumsy." He laughed, low, warm, real, and reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like two paths that had finally crossed. Together they stepped into the sunlight, the canyon behind them and the open land ahead. Not widow and warrior anymore, not strangers bound by chance, but two souls, found, healed, and chosen by fate itself.